Welcome to our compliance conversations hosted by Insurance Licensing Services of America and Spot On Insurance. They will be covering part 2 of audits, market conduct, and data calls.
That is going to be good stuff. Thank you everyone for coming and joining us. This is going to be a 1-hour session. For those of you that are participating, you can ask your questions in the Q&A and we will get to those as soon as there's a little spot to get to them. So Ted, if you can just...
Our guest panelists are Joanne Delgado, VP, Education and Compliance at the Surplus Lines Association of California, a true warrior with moves and all kinds of things going on. She manages to get here every week. Thank you, Joanne. Next is Larry Schiffer, Senior Partner, Squire, Patton, Boggs, John Haworth, Market Conduct Oversight Manager, Washington State Office of the Insurance Commissioner, and Cindy Sprole, Vice President Operations, VGM Insurance Services. And our first time guest, Paul Willis, AVP of Broker Compliance at Access Insurance. Paul, welcome.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
From our ILSA and SOI team, we have Russ Foster, who disappeared on me. He is our general manager of our ILSA team. We have Christian Masonette. He is our manager at the SOI team. And I think hidden behind the scenes, we have Sandra Taveras, our brand ambassador. Our moderator is Joyce King, our quality assurance administrator, and she's been in all sorts of departments at ILSA, so she can pretty much answer any question that may be thrown her way. Before we start getting underway, I just want to go ahead and share with everyone, I know there's a lot of new participants, so I want you guys to see right off the bat where we keep our COVID-19 regulatory bulletin updates.
Where we keep our COVID-19.
No,
you might want to know.
No. We have a newsroom and we have all of the state regulatory bulletins, and I know that Russ is going to share it with us, but if not, somebody else will share it. Joyce will share it. Russ, you're on mute, and
I bet. Okay, Russ. That would have been my fault. Thank you.
Still on mute, Russ.
Unmute, please.
There we go. All right. Now. Sorry about that. I'm juggling a couple of chainsaws here.
All right. I was juggling one for you too.
There we go. So what we are looking at here is our ILSA website newsroom. This is a great resource for anybody who wants to know what's going on out in the COVID world. If you have any issues that you want to check up on for your state specifically, or some state that you're doing business in, we have all sorts of state bulletins on the newsroom there. We even have articles. Look at that topic. Can you see that?
I like that.
Is that not the best topic in the world?
Yeah.
So I know Joanne will agree. So we can keep these up and current better than the states themselves. We oftentimes have these posted before they make it to the state websites. They're all indexed and tagged. You can either do a search or you can go by the tag topics there, and it will take you right where you want to go. You want to see what Texas is doing? There they are. Another great resource on our website is the state regulator contact page, which is on the resource page here. If you need to get a hold of your state or any particular state, just go in, click on the tab. We've got all the information for the Departments of Insurance, Department of Revenue, Secretary of State. If they have special features like licensee search or a business entity search, you can go right to that feature from this tab here. So bookmark that. It's out there. It's free for the industry. We want to make sure that everybody has great resources to stay in touch with what's going on in their states.
Awesome. Thank you, Russ. Okay. So today we're going to be covering audits, market conduct, and data calls. And the reason that we decided to put together this session was because so many times we, ILSA, gets involved in these types of things for, you know, like our clients contact us and say, hey, run these reports for me by this date and that date, I'm being audited. And so we only see it from that side, but we know that it is something that is so helpful for our clients, for our attendees. So that's why we put this session together today. So Joyce, tell us, what are we going to be hearing today?
Okay, and the reason we've asked all of these brilliant minds in here is to help educate ourselves here at ILSA. Like Arleen says, we know how to run reports that you may ask us for and to help share the information that you need us to gather, but we don't necessarily know how or why you need it. So real quickly, I want to read. This will be the only reading that I will do today. Is the definition of the purpose of market analysis, to collect and analyze specific data in order to develop a baseline understanding of the marketplace, then to identify patterns or practices of insurers that deviate significantly from the norm or that may pose a potential risk to the insurance consumer. Okay, so that was my contribution to this webinar. That's all I can do. That's all I can do. Thank you, Larry. Thank you. The rest of it's up to you guys, and I'm going to start hammering you with some questions for our audience. And I want to start real quick where we left off last week. We had just started kind of diving in a little bit into COVID and how that is affecting the data calls at this time. And the market analysis at this time. And Cindy, right quick, before I start with a question for you concerning what you're actually going through at the moment, I want to share screen real quick and show everybody, and I will copy and paste this link into the chat if anybody needs it. I hope you're able to see this, but it's the APCIA website, and it shows all of the data calls that are related to COVID. Some are from back in March all the way up through some in June. I don't see any July data calls. I don't know if there are any or if they've just not been posted here. But if you're interested in getting information on any of these state data calls, then definitely check out this website. Let me unshare my screen real quick. I just wanted to show that to y'all real quick, and right now I am pasting it into our chat for you. But Cindy, I did want to start our talk off today with you. I think we might have just briefly touched on this last week, but Arleen said that you've got some stories to share with us on your experiences right now. So talk to us about the challenges that you're facing right now regarding the COVID-19 data calls that you've received from New Jersey. I think you're also going through one right now from California. And then what are the expectations from the state?
Well, the interesting thing is this is all new. So nobody really knows what, how, why. So the challenge has been just figuring out what the states are looking for. And we are program managers, so ours rolls up with a lot of other program managers to the states. But what they ask for is like the line of business that you're writing, the eligible premium in the state, how much you've refunded. Some of them ask like the decision you make to refund, like how do you make them prove financial distress to be refunded? Since these are kind of one and done, some got extended in bigger group, but it's challenging to know what they're looking for. And sometimes when we even call our carrier partners, they're not really sure what the state's looking for because this is all new. We've never done this before. So pretty much they're all asking for the same thing, is what is the premium that was available during that time, collected during that time, how much have you refunded, how many policies. It's just depends on what they're looking for, but they'll usually send out a spreadsheet to fill out. So but we've had a lot of conversations back and forth with them too to try to decide exactly what they're looking for. And sometimes they're not clear. That makes it difficult.
Are New Jersey and California asking some of the same questions of you right now?
Yes.
It's pretty close.
Yeah, the big debate right now is whether it should include surplus lines policies. And I don't think we've gotten a clear answer. We know we have to have the admitted stuff, but the non-admitted policies, I don't think we've gotten clear direction. I think it's more the states ask for it, we'll give it to them, but it seems odd to give it to them because those policies usually aren't regulated. So that's been the question we can't really get answered because they really don't know. But I've just kind of, if they put it on the report and ask for it, we'll give it to them.
So are you, obviously you're probably separating it, admitted
Yes.
from non-admitted.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I've sat in many sessions where non-admitted carriers are like, I don't understand why I have to submit this information when we are not regulated in that state.
Right.
And I'd love to hear your opinion on this.
I'll tell you from my broker experience or broker days, if they don't ask for non-admitted, don't give them non-admitted. Essentially, non-admitted insurers can be asked for data and for reports, but it's usually a very specific request. And, you know, what I was always taught from kind of my early days is if you want to keep your whitelisting and they ask you for data, you give them the data. Outside of that, we would never typically offer data on the non-admitted carriers unless it's part of the specific data call requirements. And they will usually specify.
Yeah, ours, I think New Jersey, I don't think New Jersey included it, but California is. I'd have to look back at the reports. But it changes. I've gotten 2 different sets of requests from New Jersey. So I think it's just all so new that nobody really knows what we're supposed to be providing and what they're going to do with it. It's just foreign territory.
Well, I would say that, we have a surplus lines group at SILA, and we talk about this, the fact that surplus lines kind of doesn't fit a lot of the, a lot of state requirements don't, it's confusing to figure out when they apply to surplus lines, when they don't. So it's always challenging to see, if they're referencing an underlying statute in their request, what does that encompass? And a lot of times it does not include surplus lines, not in the business, but it's challenging to figure that out, even for simple things like changes to regulations about cancellation notices or deadlines and various things. So I'm not surprised to hear you say that on some of these other things, because surplus lines is kind of both in and outside the regulation, and I don't have an answer for you about the way to figure that out, except I guess I'm commiserating with you a little bit on that.
I think from looking at this a little bit from the outside and from the legal perspective, I think what's happening here is the people that are making the data calls on COVID-19 issues are not thinking about this at all because A, they may not understand the difference, or it's just not something they do. So when you get your normal data calls for normal stuff, stuff that you expect, that's from professionals that know exactly what they're doing, know what they're asking for. They're doing it for the specific purposes that they exist. This is an emergency. This is, oh my God, we better figure out if there are things going on there that are going to affect the solvency of these companies. So they're sort of lumping your admitted and your non-admitted companies together, because what they're trying to do is figure out what's happening economically with you. If you've issued 10,000 policies and now you've had to cancel 5,000 of those 10,000, is that going to put you into a solvency problem? And so I think that's what the confusion is. The people asking the questions aren't thinking about this division, but then when you're faced with this, you're saying, well, what am I supposed to respond to? And when you ask them do you want my non-admitted? Some of them, if they're coming from a place where they weren't trained properly, they're going to say, I don't know what you're talking about. I just need your data. So that's my outside view of this. I could be wrong, but I suspect that's a lot of what's going on.
John, what do you think?
Well, I do know that we've been looking at what our company's doing in response to COVID. And some of the things about premium refund, we just try to circle back and make sure we have rate filings and that line up with that. But it is a black swan event. It's systemic. So you're trying to look at, the capitalization and what are the risk. Is this going to be a 1 month thing? Well, now the data is kind of making it sound like this is going to tail off for quite some time. So it's basically then what are companies doing to mitigate that? There's also been some talk about, hey, how many people are really telecommuting now? A lot of companies were all set up one-stop shopping. Everyone's within arm's length, rows of cubicles, tables, all the phones. And so the issue is, well, how are you basically doing your customer service, your call centers? Do you have that remote capability? So depending on what the context is, you may have some similar type of questions, just because you're dealing with mitigation and business contingencies. This is a direct threat to a lot of us. You got people sick. What do? Do you shut down? Management gets impacted, so forth. So I think those are kind of some of the other sideline type questions that people are asking, trying to figure out, are companies set up for doing this long term? Thank you.
Hey, John, I have a question for you. As part of the NAIC, subcommittees and the working groups that you're involved in, have you started to see any language there that they're trying to standardize some of these data calls and just like really trying to across the country get some of these data calls in place?
Well, I'm on a bunch of different committees. One's basically the Market Regulation Handbook Committee that sets up the standardized data request to get specific to what you're saying. No, not at this time. Usually that's a process. So if you want to do a standardized data request on homeowners, you go through a process, vetting, you get interested parties that have their perspectives, what have you. In this case, because you have folks coming at it from different perspectives, what you might be asking for health might be completely different than P&C or life insurance or what have you. I think is kind of what's been represented is you've got people coming at it from their perspectives, trying to get the usable information within a 2-week time frame to just make sure, testing the waters, what is actually going out there, and our companies able to respond. So that doesn't mean that there might not be something, but at this point, it would probably take a couple months to come up with something that would be standardized based on what you're requesting. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you guys for weighing in on COVID. Cindy, did you have anything else for us?
No, I think so.
Okay. All right. I want to deviate a little bit from that subject, and I just have a couple of generic questions. And really, John, I wanted to ask you this, if you could really quick tell me, can inducements to purchase or any kind of incentive be offered, and how are those regulated?
Well, a short question, I don't know. I might be able to try to figure out a short response. Depends on the product line. Typically, you'll have states that will go from $25 to $100 per person that may be offered is some sort of incentive. Depends if it's in the policy language, whatever. It could also be risk mitigation. So there have been a number of states that have laws that have passed regarding like water monitoring. So if you've got a water heater that's leaking or something, there might be some companies selling homeowner policies, HO3, HO5 type forms, and they'll put in some sort of risk mitigation. You might get some sort of water detector type kit that they may install in your home. Again, for risk, we all know that there can be some incentives offered for healthcare through the ACA for wellness type activities based on those definitions. So again, it's kind of your perspective. And then also, is it something baked into the contract? If it's written into the contract, you go, well, is it an incentive? Well, but if it's in the contract, a number of states have language to say if it's in the contract, it's not necessarily rebating. It's things that are outside of the contract.
Okay.
that being said, there is a work group that is, I believe, through the EX committee at the NAIC that is looking at a rebating model law and trying to refresh that, because there's a lot of innovative products going out, insurtech entities. And they're basically saying, hey, what if we give someone this product because it will incentivize them for some sort of wellness type activity for like life insurance or for auto or whatever, you're trying to change behavior. And is that in or outside scope? So as I say, the NAIC is looking at that, trying to come up with ways of maybe being a little bit more innovative. A lot of these laws were put into effect many, many years ago, kind of as a result of, in some circumstances, these incentives were given to people that became a solvency issue for the company, where basically we had circumstances where companies came back and said, we need to control some of that. So that's where some of these laws came from. So kind of in a nutshell, that's about as short of an answer I could give you, because it gets to be rather broad.
Sounds like it.
Hey, John, could I ask you a question?
Yeah.
In what you were just talking about, the working group that's considering recasting the law, are they looking at cryptocurrency as well as an incentive?
I'm not sure that they're looking at that so much in scope, and then you've got a whole bunch of blockchain type things that.
I was just saying, yeah.
They're looking at blockchain primarily for underwriting aspects, and then there's a couple other work groups that are looking at basically innovation and technology. But
the reason I asked, John, is because I've worked with some potential clients on some other products having nothing to do with insurance, where they're using, instead of cryptocurrency, they're using tokens as an incentive for people to do things. And I could see this model working, with the app-based insurers that may want to use a token device or cryptocurrency or something similar to that to incentivize the younger customers who are buying the products using their app. So I'm just wondering if they're thinking about that in the rebate discussion, because it's going to become, it's already an issue in other industries, and they should really be thinking about it. I guess I'm just making a suggestion.
No, and it's perfectly valued, because you're saying, okay, well, it was valued at $50 today, but what's the valuation of that downstream? Are we looking at a certain time frame? So yeah, those are all good thoughts, because of the industry is changing, innovation, everything's done by an app, as you said, Larry. So those discussions will continue on. Thank you.
Great question, great point, Larry. Thank you. John, this next question is for you, and I did provide, did you raise your hand, Larry? Okay, just making sure, because if you raise your hand, I'm gonna.
Good eye, Joyce, good eye.
But don't confuse me. That's easy to do, John, I provided a short list to you and let you know that I would ask this next question of you, so you could help us out with this. When it comes to targeted examinations and understanding that all of these are triggers, which would you say is the most common that would trigger the targeted review? And from our list we have dun, 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 underwriting and rating, marketing and sales, complaint handling operations, advertising materials, licensing, policyholder services, non-forfeitures, claims handling, and policy forms and filings. And you only get to pick one.
I'll only get to pick one. Probably driving force would be complaints, because that's what we look at. But we do also look at a lot of issues where lapsed appointments, producer licensing issues, where people are either in call centers or they're not appointed in their marketing and gets tripped up. I've had that actually happen to myself, where I had a producer wanted to basically get me as a client, and he said he could handle all my insurance, but he wasn't appointed with some of the companies I have. So it was kind of, I'm not quite sure how that was going to work. So.
Wow.
Awesome. And I suspected that would be your response, but I'm so pleased that you mentioned licensing, because now we can segue to my next point, and we're going to Paul with that. Y'all see how I did that? Paul,
Yes.
how How does an insurance department audit licensed and admitted carriers to verify that producers are licensed and appointed? How do carriers produce the broker licensing information for regulators in an exam?
Well, this sort of all hinges on how you, as a carrier, get your licensing and appointment information and keep it updated. So I'll answer the last question first, and because it all weaves together. So we at SILA, and I keep referencing SILA, but I'm involved in a couple of subgroups here. We've been talking about this kind of stuff the last 2 or 3 years, saying, you know, what's the best way to understand if a producer has a license? Is a paper copy a good idea? Should you have some sort of internal tracking system you maintain manually? Should you connect with the PDB and get real-time updates? And there are a lot of people who are still asking for collecting paper copies of licenses, kind of doing it what I consider to be the old-fashioned way. But there's a movement towards, and Karen from NIPR was involved in these discussions as well. I think there's been a movement towards making sure that you've got electronically provided updated information. So as a carrier, we work with a vendor who then connects to integrated with NIPR and the producer's database to get the information. And so we give them, you know, we have information on a producer, the NPN, whatever happens to be the identifier information for that person. And then that pulls in a full dossier of all their licenses and appointments, who are appointments and all their licenses in every state of every kind. And then we know where they're licensed and where they're not, and we can make sure we have appointments where we need them, need to have them. And the thing with having that arrangement is that you can have the NIPR alerts process as part of that. So not only do you get a electronically provided complete dossier of the person's licenses, or again, companies as well, agencies or individuals we work with, get that information. You also get updates as that changes. So, you know, if you have a paper copy, the paper doesn't update itself. Right. So you may have a paper copy of a license that says Paul Willis was licensed on December 31st, 2019, and you're going, oh, it's a 2-year license, everything's cool. Well, Paul Willis had been a schmuck and got in trouble with the state and had his license suspended or not done CE, or, I mean, think of all the ways that you can mess up a license. You know, you don't pay, I think Virginia has some sort of CE fee you have to pay, don't pay that. You don't do your CE in Florida, so they yank your license or make it inactive, yank the appointment. All these kind of things happen. The paper copy is useless for tracking. Absolutely. So, so I think the solution that most have adopted is accessing the PDB in some manner and making sure that their electronic information on the producers and agencies is current. And then, you know, digesting that into their own systems for production and their underwriting systems, and then tracking that against production to say, hey, do we have the right appointments for everybody? And if you do it that way, you can also make sure you have appointments done in time. So if Paul Willis is selling something, and I've sold and submitted something today, whatever today is, the 23rd, then maybe I have 15 days, maybe I have 30 days, depending on the state, to get that appointment filed with the state. So you will know if you have electronic the information that's complete on that person. You will know today if that person needs to have an appointment filed, and you can get it done and quickly processed with the state so you maintain your compliance. So now, could you do that with a paper copy in a manual system? Yeah, you probably could, but there's all those other holes that we just talked about where that's problematic. So I think that's kind of the solution. And in our experience with the examinations with states, we don't have that many because we don't have any problems. But the few that we've had, where they're just sort of doing it's been 5 years, let's take a look. We give them all the information about the licensed parties and everything. We never give them license copies. If there was in our discussion with the states in the SILA process, when we went through this issue and sought feedback from the states, the states, we said, would you take electronic provided document instead of a paper document? And most of them said yes. There might be a situation where there's an issue with the license, some sort of, information isn't perfect across 53 jurisdictions that, reported in the PDB, or is it 54? Can't keep track of it. It's not perfect. So if there's a problem with some sort of like date, then you could go to the state website and look it up that way. And if you had to go to the person and get or delve into the state's website, and a lot of those states have agent portals and stuff, you can get the information that way and say, okay, let's go a layer deeper to the source of the license and get the information squared away and then resolve that issue. But that's a very, very small percentage of the issues we run into. The PDB is pretty accurate, frankly. And so I think that it's kind of proved its reliability, and I think that the regulators, in our experience, will accept that information. That's more of a sermon than an answer to your question, but
Joyce, a really outstanding third-party compliance company could take care of all the stuff Paul talked about. So, just saying.
And we're very familiar with the feed that you're talking about to NIPR, where we get that information because it tells us their most recent address, all the licensing information, the appointment information, regulatory actions. We love it.
Right, regulatory. Yeah, we will do that. You can also, that's a good point. You can also, if you're looking at an agent, an onboarding an agent, you can, once you have the authority to do that, from an accord form or some kind of appointment authorization form, you can pull that's a good point to raise. The PDB, NIPR says, and I think they're right, that you need to have a permissible purpose to pull that information on the agent from the PDB. So we will do that after we use an accord appointment form for people. So once we get that and they've signed it, then we pull stuff. And one of the things we do is we look for any kind of regulatory actions against the person, which will be on if you do PDB report the full way, it provides that information. And so that will also be shown there. And we've found some things that we didn't know about in the background check that way. So it's another good point to make, is that information is available and is a pretty important part of a compliance group's work to make sure that their agents are top notch and they don't have any problem people.
Right, right. I am surprised in this day and age of all of the technology, though, how many carriers are apparently still asking for those paper license copies, because we get those requests all the time. All the time.
We have a chapter in the SILA Best Practices Handbook. It used to be called license. I think it used to be called license copies or something. And I had a conniption fit, and we changed the title to something other than that, and made the point that please stop doing that. And I joined SILA in 2008, and we were talking about that then. And, so some of us have kind of had it with this paper copy stuff. I don't know if it's an old dog, new trick issue or what it is, but I don't, after seeking feedback from the states, having talked to various people, thinking about it rationally in terms of what's the best, I think the issue is, what's the best way to have the most current information on your licenses? And that solves the issue.
On Spot On Insurance, we interview people who are regularly saying how archaic the industry is and how back. And we've been hearing this for years. And I was just reaching the point where I was going to say, no, we're making a lot of progress. And then you interject with this. And I'm like, okay, we're right back. We're still doing
Well,
great.
you know,
And Larry made a comment that had me that made me laugh. It says, just like faxing. Why? I mean, who still uses fax machines?
yeah, I have a fax number on my signature thing, and people go, "Can I fax that to you?" It's like, no, you cannot.
The United States government.
Yeah.
They won't take PDFs. You have to fax them things or mail.
Yeah, yeah.
We've got a few states that still ask.
Still winning.
Oh my goodness. All right, Paul. Let's see. Real quick, sorry, John, in general, does it seem that carriers have a pretty good handle on their producer oversight? Any cases that you can talk about where carriers are using unlicensed agents, obviously not naming names, but just some examples, and if so, how is that happening?
Well, you still get it with some call centers. You'll get circumstances where oh well, they're in training or whatever, and it's like, okay, but they're answering calls and they're quoting rates and benefits and so forth. There's other times where there are third-party vendors that are trying to keep track of appointments or what have you, and things get lapsed. Our office will send out reminders to companies, and for whatever reason that doesn't get to the right person or they don't have it flagged, and so things do get lapsed. Like you say, CE credits has been mentioned earlier. There's times where we will monitor that with long-term care, maybe with annuities, suitability, things like that, where there's specific credit hours are required. And, we're seeing companies that's like, okay, well, they're selling all these things. We will go through and try to identify. We usually won't contact the company until we actually say, oh, yeah, it does look like there's a substantial gap there. But there are times where, again, we'll look at a complaint. Looks like everything's answered right, but in the letter from the complainant, they're talking about, their agent Joe, and you're trying to figure out, okay, you try to look up this guy's name, and okay, I can't find, is it the right name? You go back, and then you find out later on that they may have worked in a producer's office, but they weren't appointed, but they were doing the activities of a producer. So it's not like it's wide scale, but I think the biggest thing we run into is lapsed appointments where the company fails to renew in mass, and then we'll send out notices and it still doesn't get updated. So then we have to intercede and try to figure out what are the policies and procedures to make sure we don't have these gaps. So high level there. Thank you.
And our buddy Dennis Logan sent some information in. He said, I had a carrier request that I sent an application in once via snail mail. Safe to say they didn't win the business. Come on, carriers, get with it. Snail mail, really?
And that does come back to my, I originally was talking about, COVID is what are the contingencies? So if the question was, hey, it's got to be sent in via fax, okay, is someone there to monitor the fax?
Right.
Where I'm going. If no one's there to monitor the fax, then maybe that isn't the best process, if you get what I'm saying. So I know that, that's impacting everyone. I've got a fax number, but I rarely get anything, and most of the stuff I get would be a PDF anyway. But that allows it to be flexible. But on the other hand, for healthcare type stuff, you see a lot of stuff. Faxes are the way to go for privacy. So
Yeah,
there's two edges to everything.
Always.
Paul, what are some suggestions that you have to share with these carriers that find that they may not have an adequate system for keeping up with their producer license statuses? Words of encouragement.
yeah. Well, it depends upon if you have enough resources internally to do it yourself. We decided that it would be better for us to work with a vendor, a third-party vendor, to screw together the conduit with an IPR for the information, frankly. So And I know that that's why, you know, people like, you know, you folks are here, other vendors, because it's challenging sometimes. And, you know, depending on the side of the carrier, they may not have the resources or want to devote the resources to doing that themselves. And so I think that you got to either make a decision to invest in that work to bring in that PDB and IPR information yourself into your own systems and build that up internally, or you're going to have to partner with a vendor of some kind to do that. But you have to do one of those two things. I'm not sure there's another way to solve that issue. So, you know, we decided to go with the vendor, and it's worked pretty well. You know, the challenges would be things like that John was mentioning, where you know, people. The other thing that happens a lot is that people don't keep their license renewed timely. So a number of states will send to the carrier, you know, a list of people whose licenses went down in the last, you know, whatever, and we immediately shut them off when that happens, and we have to reappoint them as soon as they get. They're supposed to tell us, well, we will turn them off and not reappoint them until they show us that they've got their license put back in order. That's another thing that happens a lot. And the CE thing, not being compliant with CE, like in places like Florida, where they'll take your appointment, leave the license active. I say active in quotes, but you can't appoint to that license. And so that's another issue that happens. And so, you know, you say, how do I keep track of all those sort of things? Well, the answer is, like I talked about before, you've either got to build it yourself. Somehow you've got to be able to get a hold of and utilize and digest the PDB information. And like I say, either you do it yourself or you do it through a vendor.
And I'm going to tap Joanne on this, because talk to us, Joanne, a little bit from your former life, where let's say you are outsourcing to a vendor, but you're also having a group that is handling things in-house. What are the best business practices? Because I know you're super organized to kind of keep track of all of that. Let's say you're in an organization that you are piecemealing some things out, you have some things in-house. What would you suggest, you know, companies do to really have a handle on that?
I mean, essentially what we did is we really developed what I'll call a master record that we used to track all of the different pieces, who was handling them. We always maintained what I'm going to say, some sense of the overall compliance of the transaction by kind of monitoring, but really by monitoring all of the key information like licensing. We had a database that everything ran through to validate and make sure. The one thing about licensing that's, I think, that's been particularly difficult for even, I'm going to say, the members that we're meeting at the SLA is really understanding that having a license does not mean you can transact business, and that the license must be accompanied in some cases by an appointment in some states, and then as well a bond in others. So we kind of kept our pieces tracked in a master location so that we knew as we were dishing things out who had what, and then just to ensure some of those key compliance points centrally.
Yeah, and that's really important, especially, you know, in this day and age when there's so much M&A activity that you're acquiring, you know, either a company, an agency, and they have their own systems. And now all of a sudden you have to oversee all of this. You still have to track it, right? It's still your responsibility to oversee all of it.
Particularly when you're taking all of that responsibility for that organization, right? So if it's as of a certain date and it's all yours, you definitely want a little bit of oversight in that process to kind of ensure that everything's in place.
And have a backup to the backup. to the back end.
Well,
I mean-
from a regulatory perspective, we find that it's the handoffs between the carrier and the third-party vendor. And I've told these circumstances, if you just take a bunch of sticky notes and kind of write out process 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then who's responsible for it, it might clarify again what those handoffs may be, or if there's loops where you have to go back, get information, re-input it, and then start the process again. And sometimes some of that stuff gets lost in translation. The vendor will say, oh, well, it's the carrier's responsibility. The carrier will say it's the vendor's responsibility. And we kind of come back and say, folks, at the end of the day, it needs to be done. And so that's my 2 cents worth.
I would argue that it's always the carrier's responsibility at the end of the day. So, who's going to get the exam?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. No. But you do get that. Oh, well, you need to talk to the third-party vendor about that, and it's like you say, no, we actually, the AXA agents are the actual of the company, so we will hold the company responsible. But right. It is one of those where, it kind of a deflection technique, and I say, well, this is one way to mitigate that is just to identify what your processes are and ownership, and then who actually does that auditing to make sure that all those pieces fall together.
Yeah. And that's why the agreements have to be clear about what the left hand and what the right hand is doing. And if the agreements between the companies and the producers or in an M&A transaction, those agreements are not clear and those administrative rules are not clear, that's when you have this finger pointing and no, you do it, no, you do it. And meanwhile, both sides are going to get creamed.
And I don't want to just say this is only with producers, because there's a lot of things that get outsourced. It could be IT, claims handling, actuarial. And so these same things do fall into place on anything that's being transacted through some sort of intermediary, just making sure the process, procedures, everyone is in agreement what needs to be done.
That's right, because like you said, at the end of the day, it is the carrier that is responsible. Okay, right here, it looks like we've got a good little break point. Ted and Arleen, I think, did y'all have something you wanted to show real quick?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're talking about resources, and one of the things, and this is more on the compliance overall. I don't want to actually show it, but I want to just verbally say that we are releasing a suite of online licensing and compliance courses. So that's all the way from Licensing 101 to all of the Secretary of State filings. Joanne made a good point before that one of the things that she's doing to educate the SLA members is that, you might have a license, what looks like a license, and let's say in an agency licensing side, if you don't have that certificate of authority that's valid with the Secretary of State, you're out of compliance, right? So anyway, we're releasing those courses shortly. So all the way from licensing, agency licensing, producer licensing to all of the Secretary of State filings. What I do want to show right now is our podcasts as well, because our podcasts cover a lot of compliance issues. We have probably about, 30 or so that are compliance do's and don'ts, but we also have a lot of bonus episodes. We had bonus episodes on COVID-19. One of them was really, really impactful. It was about the property renewals that are going to be coming up in October. The other bonus episode that we have going on right now is insurance conversations in black and white. We have a lot of big companies that are getting involved in this and are having those conversations with us and are saying, we want to continue to have these conversations because we feel very passionate that we need to catapult this forward. So please check out those episodes. One of the things, I know that we all get busy with our day-to-day. If you go today and subscribe, and you can't listen to it today, over the weekend, you can binge on it. John, you can binge on our compliance sessions. You can binge on all of our different episodes that we have, and you'll get to know a little bit more about myself and Ted. So please do me a favor, guys, and subscribe today.
More than you ever wanted to know.
Yeah.
You may get a laugh or two.
Oh, Dennis, thank you. I love that. You guys help me cut the grass every Saturday. Look at that. Love
That is awesome.
it. Very, very good. So thank you on that. Thank you, Christian. So go ahead, Joyce, take it away.
All right. So back to, I still have a page and a half of questions. So with only 11 minutes left, clearly I should have made this 3 parts and not 2. So we're going to skip quite a few things that I had wanted to talk about. And John, I know you were just dying to tell us about IRIS ratios and risk-based capital and all that sort of stuff. I may skip that this time. But we'll see. Real quick, now this question's for Joanne and John, and I'm only picking on you two because you are the regulators here on the panel today, but anybody jump in on this if you want. Do states typically post enforcement orders?
I know Washington does. The consent orders are posted, public, timely, so it's not one of those where, okay, the consent order was signed and then it gets posted, you know, say hypothetically 6 or 8 months after the fact. No, it's pretty well done. I do know though that it is some effort sometimes to look at other states and find those enforcement orders. I know because I look through the NEIC systems and it's like, okay, I see that there is an enforcement activity done and I'm trying to figure out, okay, what's the magnitude, what's the scale, is it something I need to be concerned about, because you know regulators do talk. And so there are times where I'll look at the website for the respective state and I can't find it, and I may end up having to contact the regulator specifically to figure out if it's something I need to pay attention to. Thank you.
I would second John's words. California as well posts enforcement actions. Most of the big states, I can't tell you every single one, but I would tell you all of the big states enforcement actions are posted, easy to search. California goes back to 2001. So you can really look for a long time back if you were really looking for something historical.
And then when did the attachments warehouse begin? Was that in 2012-ish? Do you as states go in there and look as well? If you're just, now that's going to be for like a producer, I guess, not necessarily a carrier.
I wouldn't be surprised if one of our ILSA team members goes in the chat and writes that in for us.
They may. They might.
Like Sabrina.
And on the market side for companies, there are ways that we can, if the information's posted through the NEIC, we can get to that. Not everything is, and then sometimes you have to understand what the context is. So I will still call up because it's kind of reading between the lines. You know, this is enforcement action dealt with this, and it's like, okay, tangentially, did it also include something else? So there are times where I will check just to make sure I'm not reading something that is or isn't there.
And as a producer, we would use it to kind of look at new deals, as well as if we had anything that had come up for us and we got a call on, we'd kind of go out there to see who else might have had a similar action. And I'm going to say partner there to learn more and kind of talk through it. So for my broker days, we used it that way as well.
Gotcha. And I think you both have answered my other question that I was going to direct to you. Is there pretty open communication between the state insurance departments regarding carriers, the enforcement actions, and things like that?
I would say yes, only because there's some various NEIC work groups that pretty much encourage that for any sort of market action. There's a market actions working group called MOG that will look at when they're doing multi-state exams, things like that. So there'll be collaboration in that regard. There's a market regulator forum, which usually takes place at the NEIC when we have the national meetings where, well, in the past, we'd all get together and basically a big room and talk about, hey, company X, we're seeing this. Does anyone see that's a concern? And someone may say, oh, well, we checked into that, and this is what was really happening, so no issues. So we're trying to make sure for efficiency, since the states are really they may not necessarily all have the same resources. Why have 5 or 8 states contact the same company on something that's already been asked and answered? So we do try to compare that. We also have bulletin boards where, say, someone says, I'm seeing this filing, it's a product I've never seen before, was it approved in your state? The different states can respond, yes or no, or did they have conversations with an InsurTech product or something like that, so that hopefully people can be on the same page in that regard.
Wow, that's good.
6 minutes. We've got this next question. This really intrigued me, and I read this, and I just have to know. So this is for open discussion, but insurance commissioners may share documents and other materials and other information, including confidential information, with other state, federal, international regulatory agencies, as well as the NAIC and its affiliates and law enforcement. So let's talk about some situations in which law enforcement would be included or notified as the result of a market conduct exam. Yep.
Well, I'll spin it a little bit, because we actually have a CIU, a criminal investigations unit, that deals with fraud. And so it actually has commissioned officers. So we do share things like that. If we're running into, billing practices or something, we may be doing something market conduct related on the company, but in doing so, we're finding activities of certain medical providers that may not be on the up and up. We may do a referral. We may also have circumstances where you have a claim that comes in, and this person is basically asking for way more than maybe what they should be getting, and you trip over it and go, well, it seems like the company was being a little generous in trying to answer this. We may send that to our CIU area pretty much to see if there's any fraudulent activity as far as claims are going on that maybe the carrier itself didn't catch. Sometimes things are auto-adjudicated. It all depends on the circumstances, at which point they can get into their databases to see if, in fact, this claimant may have been tagged in other circumstances, like type things that I wouldn't necessarily have access to. So there are times where that comes into play. May also go to our Attorney General's office if there's some sort of enforcement thing that's on a larger scale. Most of the regulatory things, that's all civil. It's a penalty, it's a fine, something like that. But like I say, there are times when what you find is a little bit higher up than that, and you have to report to that effectively. And as I say, fraud reports come to our department from insurance companies. They're supposed to have a fraud plan, what have you. So there are times where that takes place. And like I said, I've been on the hiring panel for hiring people for our CIU. They're actually, like I said, commissioned officers. So there are times where we are talking about stuff, handoffs and so forth.
Interesting.
So one of our attendees said some of the CIU folk can carry. What does that mean, carry? Is that like carry, like
open carry?
Weapon?
Carry, come on.
Really? Oh my God.
Yeah.
What are we getting into here?
All right.
Well, they can be commissioned officers, so it's your perspectives. But if they are actually looking into like auto fraud, chop shops, things like that, it's a totally different thing than talking to someone over the phone.
Wow. So one of the things I want to say 2 things about before we wrap up is, if you need to get a hold of, our attendees, if you need to get a hold of any of our guest panelists, which I am so grateful for all of you guest panelists being here today, but if you do need to get a hold of them, just shoot us an email. You can send those emails even to the same place that you send questions, which is ccquestions@ilsainc.com. You can contact Joyce. You can call our office, 254-729-8002, and ask to get connected with any of our guest panelists. Next week, we are just kind of pivoting. We're going into a really niche type of thing. We're talking about Puerto Rico licensing, Puerto Rico Secretary of State registrations, because I know that sometimes, especially right now, it is a challenge for many of our clients. So we wanted to bring a session out on it. We also wanted to discuss why Ted and I are in Puerto Rico. Great Tax Act, which reduces our taxes to 4%. So we're going to be talking about all of the tax benefits to Puerto Rico insurance companies, insurance agencies that are here in Puerto Rico, and for licensing, whether you're a resident or non-resident in Puerto Rico. I know Sila, Diana Capes, many times has asked us and reached out to us about Puerto Rico. And so next week's session is going to be covering all of that.
You see, Doug Hart said when doing a receivership takeover, the carry part can come in handy.
Yeah, the carry part. Oh, Doug.
And Lisa, she's such a nerd. She says there was a company in Florida a few years back. For a while, there were daily reports on the fact finding and charges. It was like in the insurance version of the first 48 or live PD. I was riveted. only Lisa.
Only Lisa.
You know, Lisa, oh man. Well, thank you guys so much. Again, thank you to all of our guest panelists. We're so grateful for your participation. Have a good rest of the day, and we hope to have our attendees here next week.
Thank you all for coming on.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone, and stay
Paul,
safe.
John, everybody.